The rain poured heavily on the darkened streets of Lagos that fateful night. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a foreboding warning of what was to come. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the windshield was interrupted by the rhythmic swish of wipers, struggling against the downpour. Streetlights flickered like dying embers, barely illuminating the near-empty highway. It was October 12, 2008. Inside a sleek black SUV, Chief Damian Okafor, a business magnate, sat in the back seat beside his wife, Ngozi. Their 14-year-old son, Alexander, sat between them, his small hands wrapped around a toy car. Laughter filled the vehicle, a warm contrast to the cold storm raging outside. "Papa, one day, I will drive a big car like this," Alexander said, grinning. His father chuckled, ruffling his curly hair. "Bigger than this, my boy. Bigger than this." Ngozi smiled, but her expression changed when the driver tensed, gripping the wheel tighter. "Sir, something isn't right," he muttered, eyes darting toward the rearview mirror. Suddenly, from the opposite lane, a pair of headlights blazed through the heavy curtain of rain. A massive truck, its tires skidding uncontrollably, barreled toward them at full speed. The horn blared, a desperate, hollow warning swallowed by the night. "God, no," the driver gasped, yanking the wheel to the side. Time slowed. The world twisted into chaos. The truck collided with their car with a force that shattered glass and crumpled metal like paper. The SUV spun wildly, skidding off the road before flipping over. The sound of screeching metal and shattering glass filled the air, drowning out the screams inside. The last thing Alexander saw before everything turned black was his mother's arms shielding him and his father's terrified face frozen in time. Alexander awoke to a world of sterile white. The beeping of monitors echoed in his ears, a monotonous rhythm reminding him he was still alive. Pain burned through his body, each breath an agony. His vision blurred as he tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead. "Alex." The voice was soft, yet it sent an eerie shiver down his spine. He turned his head slightly, wincing at the effort. His uncle, Richard Okafor, stood by his bedside, an unreadable expression on his face. His suit was neatly pressed, not a trace of grief on him. His eyes held something, calculated, rehearsed sorrow. "They are gone, Alex," Richard whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your parents, they didn't make it." The words were knives, stabbing deeper than any wound from the crash. Alexander's lips parted, but no sound came. Tears spilled down his bruised cheeks as his small hands clenched the stiff hospital sheets. His mother's arms, his father's laughter, gone. Just like that. He barely registered the days that followed. The hospital room became his prison, the walls closing in with every silent moment. The nightmares were relentless, shattered glass, his mother's scream, the haunting flash of headlights. Nurses whispered about his state, about how the young heir barely ate, barely spoke. He had lost everything. And he was too young to understand betrayal, too innocent to know the crash was no accident, it was orchestrated by the very man who now held his hand. Years passed, and Alexander grew into a young man with bitterness rooted deep in his heart. Richard had taken over Okafor Enterprises, pushing Alexander into the shadows.
The once thriving empire was now a den of corruption, with Richard squandering wealth and silencing opposition. Alexander was forced to live under his uncle's roof, where scorn and hatred simmered daily. The mansion, once a place of warmth and laughter, became a gilded cage of suffering. The servants whispered behind his back, pity etched in their eyes. At the dining table, he sat at the farthest end, receiving scraps of conversation, treated like an afterthought. Every meal, every conversation, every stolen glance told him he did not belong. Richard ensured that Alexander felt his place. Publicly, he was the grieving uncle who had taken in his late brother's son. Privately, he was a tyrant, lording his stolen power over the boy who should have inherited it all. "You should be grateful, Alexander," Richard sneered one evening, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. "If it weren't for me, you'd be rotting in the streets." Alexander clenched his jaw, swallowing the retort burning on his tongue. He had learned the hard way, arguing only brought more humiliation. One evening, suffocated by the oppressive walls of the mansion, Alexander wandered aimlessly through the city. His feet led him to the outskirts, a place unfamiliar yet oddly calling to him. As he walked through the dimly lit streets, he heard the muffled cries and the jeering laughter of men. Curiosity turned into dread as he followed the sound to an open clearing, a hidden slave market. Disgust twisted his stomach. Men and women stood in chains, their heads bowed, their bodies marked by scars of past torment. Buyers circled them like vultures, throwing coins and laughing as if they were trading livestock. Then he saw her. A young woman, barely older than him, stood among the captives. But unlike the others, she did not lower her gaze. Her dark eyes burned with defiance, challenging the very men who sought to break her. Even beneath the dirt and bruises, she was breathtaking, her figure strong, her posture unyielding. She stood like a warrior among the fallen. Something inside him shifted. He stepped closer, drawn to her like a force beyond his understanding. Their eyes met. "Do you always stare, or are you going to do something?" she asked, her voice steady despite her chains. He blinked, taken aback. "You're not afraid?" She let out a dry chuckle. "Fear is a luxury for those who have something to lose. I lost everything a long time ago." Her words struck something deep within him. He understood that feeling, living without power, without control, without a future. "I can get you out of here," he found himself saying. Her lips curled slightly, almost a smirk. "And what would you do with me then? Keep me as a pet?" "No," his answer was immediate. "You deserve better than this." She studied him for a moment, then lifted her chin. "Then prove it." Alexander's fist clenched. A force he could not explain pushed him forward. "I take her," he said, his voice unwavering. The trader eyed him skeptically but smirked when Alexander pulled out a thick wad of cash. A final exchange, and Zara was shoved toward him, stumbling slightly before steadying herself. She looked at him with wary eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice rough from days of silence. He didn't have an answer. As they walked away from that place, the stench of oppression still lingering in the air, Alexander realized something had shifted within him.
For the first time in years, he felt something other than pain. He felt hope. On their way home from the club, Zora and Alexander walked in silence for a while before he finally spoke. He told her about his parents, their love, their strength, and the night it was all taken away from him. His voice was heavy, but he did not cry. Not anymore. One evening, I overheard my uncle talking to someone, Alexander said, his jaw tightening. He paid them to cause the accident. It wasn't just bad luck. It was murder. Zora stopped walking, turning to him with wide eyes. You've known this all along. He nodded. I didn't have proof then. I was just a child, and no one believed me. But I never forgot. She exhaled, her expression softening. You've carried this pain for so long, Alexander. But you're more than your past. He scoffed, looking away. I don't know who I am anymore. Zora reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. Then let's find out together. For the first time in years, something in his chest loosened. When they arrived at his uncle's house, the air was thick with tension. Richard wasn't home, but his wife, Linda, was waiting for them at the entrance, her arms crossed over her chest. And what is this? She asked, her sharp eyes scanning Zora from head to toe. She's staying with me, Alexander said firmly. Linda's lips curled into a smirk. Another mouth to feed. Richard barely tolerates you, and now you bring home a stray. Zora stiffened beside him, but Alexander squeezed her hand reassuringly. She's not a stray. And I won't let you or anyone else treat her like one. Linda sighed dramatically. Well, I hope you know what you're doing, boy. Because Richard won't like this one bit. Alexander didn't wait for her to finish. He took Zora's hand and led her inside, but he already knew the house would never feel like home. Not with Richard's shadow looming over him. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind restless. He could stay, endure the humiliation, the silent scorn, the reminders that he was nothing but a burden. Or he could leave. The choice was easy. Sleeping out before dawn, he packed only what he needed. Zora didn't hesitate when he told her. She simply nodded and followed him into the unknown. They found a small apartment on the outskirts of Lagos, modest but safe. It was the first time Alexander had lived on his own terms, and it felt liberating. Their days were spent together, slowly unraveling the secrets buried beneath the empire his father built. Zora was relentless in her belief in him. She saw the leader within him long before he did. You were meant for more than revenge, she whispered one evening as they stood on the rooftop, the city lights flickering in the distance. Your father's legacy is greater than Richard's corruption. And so, the real fight began. With Zora's help, Alexander started piecing together the web of lies Richard had spun. Hidden accounts, bribed officials, forged documents, all carefully orchestrated to ensure Richard's hold on Okafor Enterprises remained unchallenged. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the game became. Richard was watching. One evening, as Alexander returned to the apartment, he found the door ajar. His heart pounded as he stepped inside, fist clenched. Zora stood in the dim light, her expression unreadable. "They know," she said softly, holding up a torn envelope. Inside was a single note: "Stop digging, or else." Fear coiled in his stomach, but Zora's unwavering gaze anchored him. "I'm not stopping," he said firmly. She smiled then, a small, knowing smile. "Then we fight." One stormy night, Richard made his move. Alexander and Zara were ambushed, dragged before him like criminals, their hands bound, their faces bruised from the struggle. The dimly lit warehouse smelled of damp concrete and betrayal. Richard sat on a leather chair, his legs crossed, a glass of whiskey in hand, exuding the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. "You think you can take what is mine?" Richard sneered, swallowing his drink. "You're nothing, Alexander. A boy playing hero." But Alexander was no longer the scared child from years ago. He lifted his chin, his stance unyielding. "It was never yours to begin with." Zora, standing beside him, her lip bleeding but her eyes fierce, spat at Richard's feet. "Your time is up." A slow, mocking chuckle escaped Richard's lips. "And what? You think love is enough to win this war? You're as naive as your father was." Before Alexander could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the night, flashing red and blue lights flooding the warehouse. The doors burst open, and officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. Richard's smug expression faltered as men in suits entered, led by the very officials he had once paid off. The authorities, tipped off by Zora, had finally gathered enough evidence. Hidden accounts, testimonies from former employees, and the truth about Damian Okafor's murder all laid bare before the world. Richard's empire crumbled before his eyes. "You think you can do this to me?" he bellowed as officers cuffed his hands behind his back. "I built this empire. I made you all rich." "No," Alexander said, stepping forward. "You stole it. And now, you've lost." As Richard was dragged away, screaming curses, a weight lifted from Alexander's chest. Justice had been served. The nightmare was over. With Richard gone, Alexander reclaimed Okafor Enterprises, but he was no longer the boy who had once longed for revenge. His leadership was different, marked by fairness and justice. Employees who had once feared Richard now thrived under Alexander's vision. At night, in the quiet moments, he and Zara would stand on the balcony of his father's home, looking over the city. The wind would carry their whispers, their dreams interwoven with the stars above. One evening, Zora leaned against the railing, gazing at the skyline. "It doesn't feel real," she murmured. "That it's over." Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "It's just the beginning." She turned to face him, her fingers tracing the lines of his face. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." "I know," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Because I have you." Their love had been forged in fire, but now, in the quiet after the storm, it flourished. Their nights were filled with laughter, whispered confessions, and stolen kisses. He had never known peace before her, never known what it meant to be truly seen. One night, as they lay in bed, Alexander ran his fingers through her hair. "Marry me," he whispered. Zora stilled, her breath catching. "What?" He propped himself up on one elbow, looking into her eyes. "I don't want to spend another day without knowing your mind forever." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she breathed. 1,000 times, yes. As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the scars of the past finally began to fade. They had found something greater than power, love, hope, and the miracle of a second chance. As Alexander stood on the balcony once more, the city stretched before him, he whispered a silent promise to his parents. "I am home." And with Zora's hand in his, he knew he had found everything he had ever needed. The end.